The warning sirens started screaming across Viridian Prime Station at exactly 1447 Galactic Standard Time. Every sensor array pointed toward the same impossible sight. Ships were coming out of slipspace at the edge of Council territory. Big ships. Strange ships. Ships that made the ancient detection systems flash red with warnings nobody had seen in centuries. Council Speaker Veltax stood in the central command chamber, his mantis-like body perfectly still as he watched the screens. Around him, representatives from 1,000 different species were panicking. Some were running. Others were calling their homeworlds. A few just stared at the readings, unable to believe what they were seeing. The ships were massive. Sleek metal bodies that caught the light of nearby stars and seemed to glow with their own energy. There were hundreds of them, arranged in formations that looked almost like art, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The technology reading from those vessels made no sense. The power signatures were off the charts. The Council's best scientists were already saying these ships shouldn't be possible. Security. Commander G1 Lee stood on the bridge of the lead human vessel, watching the alien station with calm eyes. She had trained her whole life for this moment. So had her parents. And their parents. And thousands of generations before them. Today, humanity would knock on the door they had been locked out of for 800,000 years. Admiral. Hyeon Woo Kim sat in the command chair, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the armrest. He was a tall man with gray hair and eyes that had seen more simulations of this moment than he could count. Next to him, Ambassador Tae-Yong Park reviewed his notes one more time. The ambassador was younger, maybe 50 years old, with the kind of face that smiled easily. But right now, he wasn't smiling. Back on Viridian Prime, Velthex finally moved. His translator box crackled to life. Get me everything we have on those ships. Scan them. Identify them. I want to know who they are and what they want. A small flying creature fluttered up to him, its wings beating frantically. Speaker, the scans are coming back strange. The materials, the energy signatures, they're all unknown. But there's something else. There's a pattern in the hull designs. The computers found a match. Velthax turned his large compound eyes toward the creature. A match. In our database? Yes, Speaker. From the ancient records. From the exile files. The creature's voice dropped to almost a whisper. These are human ships. The chamber went completely silent. Every being stopped what they were doing. Human. The word hung in the air like poison. Humans had been exiled so long ago that most species thought they were just a story. A warning tale that older civilizations told younger ones. Be careful. Be wise. Or you'll end up like the humans, locked away forever. Velthax felt something cold move through his body. That's impossible. Humans were primitive. They barely had functional slipspace drives. They were contained, sealed in their home system with a barrier that would destroy any ship that tried to cross it. The barrier is still active, Speaker. We checked. It's still there, still functioning. But these ships are here anyway. On the human flagship, Taeyang stood up and straightened his diplomatic robes. They were simple clothes, white and clean, with a small symbol on the chest. A blue and green circle. Earth. Home. The only world humans had known for longer than most civilizations had existed. Open a channel, Hyeon Woo said quietly. All frequencies. Make sure everyone can hear this. The communication officer nodded and pressed several buttons. A soft tone indicated they were broadcasting. Taeyang stepped forward and began to speak. Greetings to the Galactic Council. I am Ambassador Taeyong Park, representing humanity. We come in peace and with respect. 800,000 years ago, your predecessors exiled us to our home system. We accepted that judgment. We stayed behind the barrier you created. We built our civilization in the space you allowed us. Now we return, not as the species you remember, but as the species we have become. We request permission to rejoin galactic society. Taeyang spoke in Galactic Standard, the common language used across council space, but he spoke it perfectly. Every tone was right. Every word was precise. It was the kind of fluency that took lifetimes to master. And then, just to make sure everyone understood, the message repeated. In 40,000 different languages. Every known tongue in the galaxy, spoken by a computer system that had clearly studied them all in detail. The council chamber exploded into chaos. Species were shouting at each other. Some demanded they attack the human ships immediately. Others wanted to run. A few wise ones called for calm and negotiation. Velthax raised his arms for silence, but it took several minutes before the noise died down. Emergency session, he announced. Now we vote on how to respond. The debate lasted for hours. A reptilian security chief named Kryn wanted to send the entire council fleet against the humans. They were exiled for a reason. They were too aggressive, too unpredictable, too dangerous. If they've somehow escaped their prison, we need to push them back. But others disagreed. A floating crystalline being named Vex spoke in a voice like singing glass. We don't know what they've become. We don't know how they got here. We don't know what they want beyond their simple message. Attacking them without information would be foolish. Allowing them to get closer would be suicide, Kryn shot back. The arguments went round and round. Finally, Velthax made a decision. We allow a delegation. One ship. A limited number of representatives. They dock at Station Port 7 under maximum security. We talk to them. We learn what we're dealing with. Then, we decide. The vote was close, but it passed. The message was sent to the human fleet. Permission granted for one delegation. Come aboard. But be warned, any hostile action would be met with overwhelming force. On the human flagship, Jiang and Haiyanwu looked at each other. The admiral's face was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes. Something ancient and patient. Ready? He asked. Taeyong nodded. We've been ready for 800,000 years. Their shuttle detached from the main ship and began its approach to Viridian Prime. Behind them, the human fleet waited in perfect formation. Engines humming with power that could reshape worlds. Inside that shuttle, 2 humans carried the weight of their entire species' history. They were about to walk into a chamber full of beings whose ancestors had thrown humanity away like trash. And the council had no idea what was coming. The docking port opened with a hiss of equalizing air pressure. Taeyong stepped through first, followed by Haiyanwu, and then 3 others. Dr. Biora Choi carried a data pad close to her chest like it was made of gold. Trade Minister Jae Sung-han walked with his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes taking in everything. Behind them, Ji-Won Lee moved with the quiet grace of someone who missed nothing. The reception area was packed with aliens. Creatures of every shape and size imaginable. Some had scales, others had fur. Some floated in the air, others crawled on multiple legs. There were beings made of crystal and beings made of living metal. All of them stopped to stare at the humans. Velthax stood at the front of the welcoming party, if it could be called that. His translator hummed to life. Ambassador Park, welcome to Viridian Prime. I am Council Speaker Velthax. Tiang bowed slightly. It was a gesture from Earth, from human culture. But somehow it felt right. Thank you for receiving us, Speaker. We know this must be difficult. Difficult is one word for it. Velthax turned and began walking. Follow me. The full council is waiting. They walked through corridors that were clearly designed for beings much larger than humans. The ceilings stretched high above their heads. The walls were covered in symbols and lights that probably meant something important. Other aliens pressed themselves against the walls as the humans passed, watching them with fear or curiosity or both. Kryn. The reptilian security chief walked beside them, surrounded by guards. Each guard was armed with weapons that could level buildings. They wore armor that could stop missiles. But somehow they looked nervous. Kryn kept his eyes locked on Haiyanwu, watching the admiral's every move. Your ships, Kryn said suddenly. How did you pass the barrier? Haiyanwu glanced at him. We didn't.
That's impossible.
The barrier would have destroyed any human ship trying to leave your system. We've monitored it for thousands of years. It's never failed. It hasn't failed now, Ji-Won said quietly. It's still there. Still working perfectly? Kryn's scales rippled with confusion. Then how are you here? We found another way, was all GH1 would say. They entered the council chamber. And even the humans, who had prepared for this moment their entire lives, had to pause. The room was enormous. It stretched up so high that clouds actually formed near the ceiling. Thousands upon thousands of seats filled the space in a spiral pattern. And in every seat sat a representative of a different species. 4,000 different civilizations all gathered in one place. A floating crystalline being drifted down toward them. Its voice sounded like wind chimes. "I am Counselor Thex. I speak for the Ethical Committee. We have many questions." Taeyong nodded. "We expected that. We'll answer what we can." They were led to a platform in the center of the chamber. Speakers carried Taeyong's voice to every corner of the massive room as he began his formal petition. "Honored council members, we come before you not as conquerors or beggars, but as fellow travelers in this galaxy. 800,000 years ago, humanity was judged too aggressive and unpredictable to join your civilization. We were confined to our home system. We accepted that judgment because we understood you were afraid of us. And you think we should not be afraid now?" Velthox asked. "You arrive with ships that surpass our technology. You somehow bypassed a barrier that has never failed. You speak every language in the galaxy. Should we be comforted by this?" Bora stepped forward. She was a small woman with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a simple style. "Speaker, may I explain what humanity has done in the time since our exile?" Velthax gestured for her to continue. "The first 100,000 years were the hardest," Biora said, her voice steady. "We were trapped in our solar system. We had 8 planets and 1 star. That was our entire universe. Many humans wanted to fight the barrier, to break through by force. But wiser voices prevailed. We decided to accept our fate and make the best of it." She activated her datapad, and holographic images appeared above the platform. Images of Earth, of Mars, of stations orbiting distant planets. We expanded through our solar system using generation ships that took decades to reach their destinations. We built habitats in the asteroid belt. We mined resources from the outer planets. We learned to live in space as naturally as we once lived on land. "Impressive for primitives," someone shouted from the upper seats. "But that doesn't explain your ships." Biora smiled slightly. "I'm getting to that. After 300,000 years, we had colonized our entire solar system. We had 800 billion people living across dozens of worlds and thousands of stations. We had no wars because there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. We had to learn to resolve our conflicts through words and wisdom instead of violence." Jae-sung spoke up, his voice friendly and casual. "We also had nothing else to do but innovate. See, when you have the entire galaxy to explore, you can afford to be sloppy with your technology. If something doesn't work, you move on to the next star. But we couldn't do that. We had to make everything perfect because we had nowhere else to go." Vex drifted closer. "You're saying that isolation made you stronger?" "Not just stronger," Biora said. "Better. We spent 800,000 years perfecting everything. Our ships, our medicine, our social systems, our art and culture. We had time that no other species has ever had. Time to really think about what we wanted to be." Velthax leaned forward on his speaking platform. "And what did you decide you wanted to be?" "Something that didn't need the Galactic Council," Hyenwu said, his voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. "We could have stayed in our system forever. We're happy there. We have everything we need. But we realize something important. Just because we don't need you doesn't mean we shouldn't want to know you." The chamber erupted into arguments. Some counselors demanded proof. Others called the humans liars. A few sat in thoughtful silence. Kryn stood up, his voice amplified across the room. "Prove it. Prove that you're not the aggressive species we exiled. Prove that you've changed." Hyenwu turned to look directly at the security chief. "In 800,000 years, has the Galactic Council ever wondered if you made a mistake?" The question hung in the air. No one answered. The truth was obvious to everyone. The Council had never questioned the exile. They had simply assumed the old decision was correct and moved on. For 800,000 years, they had never once asked if humanity deserved another chance. Dex's voice was soft, almost sad. "What do you want from us?" Tang looked around the chamber at thousands of faces from thousands of worlds. "Nothing you're not willing to give freely. But first, let us show you what we've built. Send a delegation to our system. See humanity with your own eyes. Then decide if we're still the species you need to fear." The council debated for hours after the humans were escorted to guest quarters. Some wanted to reject the offer immediately. Others were curious despite their fear. Finally, Velthax called for a vote. A science delegation would visit the human system under heavy guard. They would verify the claims. They would report back. Then the council would make its final decision. In their quarters, the 5 humans sat in comfortable silence. Taeyang poured tea from a container he had brought from Earth. The smell filled the room, familiar and warm. "They're terrified," Guan said. Gudhaiyanwu replied. "Fear makes them careful. Careful means they'll actually pay attention to what we show them." Biora sipped her tea and smiled. "They have no idea, do they?" "No," Taeyang said quietly. "They really don't." The Council's science vessel arrived at the edge of the human system 3 days later. It was a massive ship, carrying the galaxy's best scientists and protected by enough weapons to fight a small war. Vraxum, the chief scientist, stood on the bridge surrounded by displays showing every sensor reading they could gather. He was a being of tentacles and eyes, considered the smartest physicist in known space. "Bring us in slowly," Vraxum ordered. "Maximum scans. I want to know everything." Captain Yunji Quan stood on the bridge of the human escort vessel, watching the alien ship approach. She was a woman with sharp features and patient eyes. She had volunteered for this duty because she understood how important it was. First impressions would shape everything that came after. "Good morning, Science Vessel Clarity," Yonji said over the communication channel. "This is Captain Quan of the human ship Homeward. We're honored to guide you through our system. Please follow our course and feel free to scan anything you'd like." Vraxum's translator crackled in response. "We will scan everything human. Be assured of that." They started with Earth. The blue and green world that humans had been born on hung in space like a jewel. Sensor readings came flooding back to the alien ship, and the scientists started talking all at once. 50 billion life signs. Massive cities that somehow blended perfectly with natural forests and oceans. Energy readings that indicated a civilization in perfect balance with its environment. "Impossible," one scientist whispered. "No species maintains this kind of balance at this population level. The pollution alone should have killed the planet." Vraxum studied the readings carefully. "Unless they learned how to live without creating pollution. Look at their energy signatures. Those aren't fusion reactors. Those aren't antimatter cores. What are they?" Engineer Dong Haeon Yoon appeared on their communication screen, his face cheerful and friendly. "Hi there. I'm Dong Haeon, your technical guide for this visit. I can answer questions if you have any." "Your energy sources," Vraxum demanded. "What are you using?" "Oh, we call it quantum tapping. We pull energy directly from the quantum field itself. Clean, unlimited, and completely safe. We developed it about 500,000 years ago. Took us a while to perfect it, but we had time." Dong Haeon grinned, like he was discussing something as simple as a recipe. The alien scientists looked at each other, with something approaching horror. Quantum tapping was a theory that council physicists had worked on for millennia. They all agreed it was impossible. Yet here were humans using it to power a planet of 50 billion people. They moved on to Mars. The red planet the council records showed as a dead, dusty world was now alive. Oceans covered a third of its surface. Green continents stretched beneath white clouds. 30 billion humans lived there, according to the scans. "How?" Vraxum's voice had lost its demanding tone. Now he just sounded confused. "Terraforming takes millions of years." "Usually, yes," Donghan agreed. "But we had some advantages. First, we had nowhere else to go, so we could focus all our resources on one project. Second, we had really good simulations. We ran millions of tests before we started the actual work. When we finally began terraforming, we knew exactly what would work. Venus came next. The planet that had been a hellish world of crushing pressure and acid rain was now a paradise. Slightly smaller than Earth, but beautiful in its own way. 20 billion people lived under skies that showed a sun gentler than the one that scorched the original. Venus. A small flying scientist fluttered near Veraxum. Speaker, I've never seen terraforming work this complete. These aren't colonies clinging to life. These are genuine living worlds. The kind that take billions of years of natural evolution to create. Or 800,000 years of focused effort, Vraxum said quietly. They passed through the asteroid belt. And every scientist on the ship stopped working to stare. The belt wasn't just mined. It was inhabited. Thousands of stations, each one different, each one home to millions of humans. Gardens grew in rotating cylinders. Cities floated in bubbles of air held by force fields. Art installations the size of mountains drifted through space, beautiful for no reason except that humans wanted beauty in their lives. Junior Diplomat the Jinn song appeared on the screen, her face bright with enthusiasm. She was young, maybe 25, and this was her first time meeting aliens. Welcome to the Belt. Isn't it beautiful? I grew up on Station Harmony. That's the one that looks like a flower. See it? Each petal is a different cultural district. We have art from every period of human history there. Vraxum couldn't help but respond to her infectious excitement. It's very impressive. How many people live in the belt? Oh, about 200 billion, I think. Maybe more. People move around a lot, so it's hard to count exactly. The Jinn said it like she was discussing the population of a small town, not more beings than existed on most council worlds. The outer planets were even more shocking. Gas giants surrounded by networks of mining platforms and refineries, ice worlds converted into water sources for the inner system. Every moon, every piece of rock, every bit of space was used for something. Not in a crowded way, but in a way that showed incredible organization and planning. Donghaean guided them to the Oort cloud, the distant region of space at the very edge of the solar system. This is where we build most of our ships, he said casually. Well, the civilian ones anyway. The military construction happened somewhere else, obviously. Raxum's tentacles went rigid. These are your civilian shipyards? Practice yards, actually, the Jinn chimed in. She didn't seem to understand why the alien scientists suddenly looked terrified. The real yards are classified, but these ones are big enough for most purposes. The platforms in the Oort cloud were massive beyond description. Each one could have built the Council's science vessel 100 times over, and there were dozens of them. All working on ships that made the human diplomatic fleet look small. Vraxum did the calculations in his head. If these were practice yards, if these built civilian vessels, then what could the real military construction facilities produce? The answer was terrifying. The answer was that humanity could probably build more ships in a year than the entire Galactic Council could build in a century. But it wasn't just the scale that shocked the scientists. It was everything else they learned over the next few days. Human art that had evolved through 800,000 years of uninterrupted culture. Music that blended styles from a million different periods. Literature that filled libraries bigger than most space stations. Philosophies and religions that had matured beyond anything the Council had ever encountered. Bor joined them for dinner on the third day. She sat across from Vraxum, eating simple food from Earth, while the scientist picked at something from his home world. You understand what you've done, don't you? Vraxum asked quietly. You've created something unprecedented. Oh, Bora nodded. We had a unique opportunity. Most species spread across the galaxy, their attention divided among thousands of worlds. We had one system. We could focus everything we had on making it perfect. The Council will fear this, I know. Yora took a sip of tea. But here's what they need to understand. We didn't build all this to threaten anyone. We built it because we had to survive. And then, when survival was secure, we built it because we wanted to thrive. And now that we're thriving, we're finally ready to look outward again. Not as conquerors. Not as beggars. Just as people who want to meet other people? Vraxum was silent for a long moment. I will tell the council what I've seen. I will tell them the truth. Whether they listen or not is beyond my control. That's all we ask, Biora said with a gentle smile. The science vessel left the human system, carrying data that would shake the foundations of galactic society. Vraxum prepared his report carefully, weighing every word. When he finally delivered it to the council, his message was simple and devastating. Humanity doesn't need the Galactic Council. They have everything they require in their one system. Their technology surpasses ours in almost every field. Their culture is deeper and richer than anything we've encountered. Their population is larger than most council member civilizations. The question we must ask ourselves is not whether we should accept humanity back. The question is whether humanity needs us at all. And the terrifying answer is that they don't. They're being kind by offering to rejoin us. We should be grateful for that kindness. The emergency council session started at dawn and showed no signs of ending by nightfall. The chamber was more crowded than it had been in centuries. Every species wanted their voice heard on the human question. The debate had split the council down the middle. Neither side was willing to give ground. War Marshal Krithos stood at his speaking platform, his insectoid body rigid with conviction. I have reviewed the science delegation's report. I have seen the data. And I am more convinced than ever that humanity represents an existential threat to galactic civilization. Murmurs of agreement rippled through certain sections of the chamber. Krithos continued, his voice sharp and clear. Consider what we know. Humanity was exiled for aggression and unpredictability. In isolation, they have become more powerful than any species in recorded history. They have technology we cannot match. They have resources we cannot imagine. They have ships that could sweep aside our defenses. And now they want back into council space. They came in peace, Dex interrupted, the crystalline being's voice cutting through the tension. They asked permission? They showed us their civilization willingly. These are not the actions of conquerors. These are the actions of beings intelligent enough to know that appearing peaceful serves their goals better than showing force. Krithos shot back. I propose we strengthen the barrier around their system. We add quarantine fleets. We make it clear that humanity will remain contained, regardless of what they have become. The chamber erupted into arguments. Species shouted at each other across the vast space. Some agreed with Krithos. Others called him a coward. The debate went in circles for hours. Felt finally called for order. His voice amplified until it drowned out everything else. Enough. We will hear from the humans themselves. Ambassador Park has requested to address this session. I move that we allow it. The vote was close, but it passed. Taeyang and his delegation were brought into the chamber under heavy guard. But something had changed in the days since the science delegation returned. Ambassador Min Ho Jung walked beside Taeyang, and several younger council species nodded to him as he passed. He had been busy during the waiting period, it seemed. Minho was a quiet man, with a gentle smile. While the council had been debating, he had been having tea with junior diplomats from newer council species. He had shown them human poetry. He had played them human music. He had talked to them about philosophy and art and the simple pleasure of conversation. He had made friends, and those friends were now speaking up in council sessions, asking questions that made the older species uncomfortable, questions about whether the council was really serving its members, or just maintaining power structures that benefited those who had been there longest. Historian Hwan Im walked with the delegation, carrying datapads filled with research. She was an older woman, probably 70, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She had spent weeks in the council archives, reading records that most species had forgotten existed. Taeyang stepped onto the central platform and bowed respectfully to the assembled council. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I know this decision weighs heavily on you all. I know you're afraid. I would be afraid too in your position. You should be afraid, Krithos said. Your ancestors were exiled for good reason, weren't they? Haewon stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. Speaker Velthax, I request permission to share what I found in your archives. Velthax looked uncomfortable but nodded. Proceed. Awen activated a holographic display. Ancient records appeared in the air above them, texts in languages so old that few current species could read them. These are the original exile proceedings. I had them translated. The vote to exile humanity was 847-3. The majority opinion cited human aggression and unpredictability. But there were 3 species who voted against exile. Would you like to know what they said? The chamber was silent. HFY continued. They said humanity was asking uncomfortable questions. Questions about why some species had more votes than others in the council. Questions about whether the trade agreements were fair to newer members. Questions about who really benefited from council decisions. The 3 dissenters argued that humanity was exiled not for being dangerous, but for being inconvenient. That's ancient history, someone shouted from the upper seats. Is it? HFY asked. Because I've noticed that in 800,000 years, the council structure hasn't changed much. The same old species still hold most of the power. Newer species still struggle to have their voices heard. Maybe humanity was asking the right questions back then. Maybe that's why we scared you. Belthax shifted uncomfortably. Even if that's true, it doesn't change the fact that humanity is now more powerful than the council itself. That's a legitimate concern. HFY finally spoke, his voice carrying across the chamber. You want to know about our military capabilities? You want to know if you should be afraid of our ships and our weapons? So, I'll tell you the truth. We could have broken through your barrier 400,000 years ago. The chamber exploded into chaos. Species were screaming for the humans to be arrested. Others were calling for immediate military action. Krythos looked vindicated, his body language practically shouting that he had been right all along. HFY waited for the noise to die down before continuing. We could have broken through. We had the technology. We had the capability. And we chose not to. The chamber went quiet again. HFY looked around at thousands of faces from thousands of worlds. The humanity that was exiled 800,000 years ago, the one you were afraid of, they probably would have broken through that barrier the moment they could. They would have come back with weapons and rage and demanded justice for what was done to them. But we're not that species anymore. He paused, letting his words sink in. Isolation changed us. Being trapped taught us patience. Having limited resources taught us cooperation. Facing the reality that we only had each other taught us to resolve conflicts through wisdom instead of violence. We became something better than what we were. But make no mistake about one thing. HFY's voice grew cold and hard. Humanity will never be caged again. We're offering to rejoin your civilization as equals and partners. We're offering trade, cultural exchange, and friendship. But we're not asking for permission to exist. We don't need your approval to thrive. We're being polite by knocking on the door. Don't make the mistake of thinking that means we need you to open it. Dex drifted down closer to the platform. What you're saying is that we have a choice. Accept you as equals, or make an enemy of the most powerful civilization in the galaxy. No, Taeyang said gently. What we're saying is that you can have friends, or you can have nothing. We're not interested in being enemies. If you refuse us, we'll simply go back to our system and continue living our lives. We'll be fine either way. The question is whether the Council wants to benefit from what we can offer, or whether fear will make you choose isolation. Minho stepped forward. I've spent the last few weeks talking to many of you. The younger species, the ones who weren't around when humanity was exiled, they're excited about meeting us. They want to learn from our experiences. They want to share their own cultures with us. It's the old guard, the ones who have held power for millennia who are afraid. Maybe ask yourselves why that is. Velthax was about to respond when every alarm in the station started screaming. Red lights flashed throughout the chamber. A security officer rushed to Krythos, speaking urgently. The war marshal's face went pale. We're under attack, Krythos announced. Multiple fleets entering Council space from Sector 7. It's the Vrex. They're coming in force. The chamber descended into panic. The Vrex were a species from beyond Council borders, known for their brutality and expansionist policies. They had been probing Council defenses for decades. Council strategists had always assumed that if the Vrex attacked, they would start with a small force. A test. This was not a test. Sensor readings showed over 10,000 Vrex warships entering Council space. They were heading straight for Viridian Prime. Veltok stood frozen, his compound eyes wide with shock. This is impossible. They couldn't have gathered that many ships without us knowing. They've been watching the situation with humanity, Krithos said grimly. They think the Council is distracted and divided. They're taking advantage of the chaos. Council Defense Commander Xyloth was already coordinating defenses, but his voice carried despair. Our fleet is scattered across Council space. We can maybe get 3,000 ships here in time. Against 10,000 Vurex warships, we'll be slaughtered. Every eye in the chamber turned to the human delegation. Taeyong stood calmly, watching the chaos unfold around him. Finally, Velthax looked at him directly. This is why we feared you. This is why we were afraid. Taeyong shook his head slowly. No, speaker. You feared we would become what they are. You were afraid humanity would be a species that attacks the weak and takes what it wants by force. But you were wrong. We became something different. Haiyanwu opened a communication channel. Admiral Kong, this is Haiyanwu. You are authorized to render assistance to Viridian Prime, defend the station. Woman's voice came back over the channel, crisp and professional. Already in position, Admiral. Commencing defensive operations now. Admiral Subin Kong stood on the bridge of the human battleship, Eternal Vigil, watching the tactical displays with calm precision. She was a woman in her 60s with short gray hair and the kind of face that never seemed worried about anything. Behind her, 200 human warships moved into position between the Vrex fleet and Viridian Prime Station. The Vrex Overlord. Thraxus sat in his command throne aboard the massive warship Devastator, laughing at what his sensors showed him. 200 ships against 10,000. The humans were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Either way, they would die quickly. All vessels, advance, Thraxus ordered. Destroy the human ships, then crack open that station like an egg. Today, the Council falls and the Vrex rise. His fleet surged forward, weapons charging, ready to unleash destruction. The Council's defense platforms were already firing, but Vrex shields easily absorbed the attacks. Council ships were scrambling to respond. They were hopelessly outnumbered and out of position. On Viridian Prime, the Council chamber had become a command center. Species that had been arguing moments before now worked together in desperate coordination. Velthex stood at the central platform watching the battle displays with growing horror. The humans are positioning themselves in our defense perimeter, Xyloth reported. 200 ships against 10,000? It's suicide. G1 Lee stood near the observation window, watching the space battle unfold. Combat specialist Woojin Park worked at a nearby console, her fingers dancing across controls as she coordinated with the human fleet. She was young, maybe 30, but she moved with the confidence of someone who had trained for this moment her entire life. Admiral Kong is broadcasting, Woojin said calmly. Putting it on speakers, Subin's voice filled the chamber, transmitted on all frequencies so every ship in the area could hear. Vrex forces, you're attacking a civilian station that houses representatives from 4,000 civilizations. This is a war crime under galactic law. Withdraw immediately, or we will be forced to respond. Thraxus's laughter crackled over the communication channels. Humans, your species was exiled like the trash you are. You have no authority here. Your 200 ships are nothing against my fleet. Surrender now, and I might let some of you live as slaves. That's unfortunate, Subin said with genuine sadness in her voice. We really hoped you would choose peace. The human ships opened fire. What happened next would be talked about in the galaxy for generations. The human vessels moved with impossible grace, like dancers performing a routine they had practiced for lifetimes. Their weapons cut through Vrex shields as if they weren't there. Beams of concentrated energy sliced through armor like paper. Missiles that could never be caught by point defenses somehow found their targets every single time. But more impressive than the destruction was the precision. Human weapons disabled instead of destroyed. They targeted engines, leaving Vrex ships adrift but intact. They neutralized weapon systems without breaching holes. They shut down shields without killing crews. In the span of minutes, hundreds of wrecked ships went dark, floating helplessly in space with their crews alive but completely powerless. On the Devastator, Thraxus watched in growing horror as his fleet was systematically dismantled. How is this possible? Their ships are smaller than ours. They have fewer weapons. How are they doing this? His tactical officer's voice shook. Overlord, their technology is beyond anything in our databases. Their targeting is perfect. Their shields absorb everything we throw at them. And their weapons. Their weapons are somehow targeting our critical systems without destroying the ships. Then destroy them. Thraxus roared. Concentrate all fire on the human vessels. Overwhelm them with numbers. The Vrex fleet adjusted, thousands of ships focusing their weapons on the human force. Energy enough to vaporize planets poured toward the 200 human vessels. The Council Watchers expected to see the humans wiped out instantly. Instead, the human ships simply continued their work. Their shields held against the impossible barrage. Their point defense systems created walls of intercepting fire that caught every missile, every torpedo, every projectile. They moved through the storm of destruction like it was a gentle rain. Wu Jin worked at her console, providing tactical coordination to the human fleet from inside the council chamber. Targets prioritized. Disable the command ships first. We want their leadership intact for questioning. Dong Hayan appeared on a communication screen, his usual cheerful expression replaced by something more serious. All human vessels, remember your training. Minimum force necessary. These are living beings making bad choices. We don't kill them for that if we can avoid it. The Devastator shuddered as human weapons found it. Thraxus felt his ship die around him. Engines offline. Weapons offline. Shields offline. But life support still running. Emergency power still functioning. His crew was alive. They were just completely helpless. All across the battlefield, the story was the same. 10,000 wrecked ships, and not one of them destroyed. Disabled, drifting, defeated, but intact. Their crews were alive, probably terrified, but alive. In 20 minutes, the battle was over. Not a single human ship had taken serious damage. Not a single Vrex crew member had been killed. The most one-sided battle in galactic history had just happened. And it ended without a single death on either side. Subin opened a channel to the station. Council members, your space is secure. We'll begin towing Vrex vessels to holding positions. I recommend you organize custody arrangements. These crews will need processing. The council chamber was completely silent. Every being stood frozen, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The greatest invasion force in recorded history had been stopped by 200 ships without breaking a sweat. Vraxum spoke first, his tentacles trembling. The technology gap. It's even larger than I reported. We're not just behind humanity. We're so far behind that it's like comparing fire to nuclear fusion. They could have destroyed those ships, Dex said softly. Every single one. But they chose not to. They valued Vrex's lives even while defending against an invasion. Krithos stood at his platform, his body language showing defeat. I was wrong. His voice was quiet but firm. Humanity isn't the species we should fear. They're the species that would terrify me if they weren't showing restraint. He looked at the human delegation. If you wanted to conquer the galaxy, you could have done it centuries ago. The fact that you're here asking to join us, instead of commanding us, proves you're not what we feared. Taeyong bowed slightly. Thank you for understanding that, War Marshal. Belthex took a deep breath. The vote? We need to vote on humanity's petition. He looked around the chamber. All in favor of accepting humanity back into the Galactic Council as full members with all rights and privileges? The vote was unanimous. 4,000 species, every single one voting yes. Even those who had been afraid. Even those who had wanted to strengthen the exile. All voted to welcome humanity home. Taeyang accepted with grace and humility. We don't come as conquerors or saviors. We come as equals, finally. We look forward to learning from you as much as you might learn from us. The exile barrier was scheduled to come down within the week. Human ships would be free to travel the galaxy. Trade agreements were already being drafted. Cultural exchanges were being planned. A new era was beginning. The Jinn stood with a group of alien diplomats, all of them talking excitedly about cooperation and friendship. She was making plans to visit their worlds, to see what other civilizations had built, while humanity was isolated. Hyan Wu and Velfax stood together near a viewing port, watching the disabled Vrex fleet being organized into custody. The council speaker finally asked the question that had been bothering him since the battle ended. "You said you could have broken through our barrier 400,000 years ago. Why didn't you?" Hyan Wu was quiet for a moment. "Because breaking through would have made us the species you feared. We would have proven that you were right to exile us. So instead, we decided to become the species that proved you were wrong." "You became better than us," Velfax said. "It became different," Hyan Wu corrected gently. "The galaxy needs all kinds of people, Speaker. You needed time to grow beyond the fear that made you exile us. We needed time to grow beyond the anger that would have driven us to revenge. Now we're both ready for something better." Outside the station, human and council ships worked together to repair the damage from the battle. Engineers from a dozen species collaborated on fixing defense platforms. Medical teams treated minor injuries suffered during the chaos. Slowly, carefully, the foundations of a new relationship were being built in the council archives. A junior administrator made a final update to the ancient exile order. Under the long list of reasons for humanity's exile, under all the warnings and restrictions and fears, she added one new line. It read, "This order is hereby revoked. Exile taught humanity what we could not, that true strength is choosing peace when you have the power to choose war. They have proven themselves worthy not by becoming weak, but by becoming wise. May we learn from their example." The galaxy was changing. After 800,000 years of isolation, humanity had returned. The council was beginning to understand that exile had been a gift to both species. Humanity learned to stand alone. The council learned what they had lost by giving in to fear. Now, together, they could build something neither could have achieved separately. A new chapter in galactic history was beginning. For the first time in a long time, everyone felt hopeful about what came next.